Between 1945 and 1960, American housewives baked 30 pies that cost less than $1. Pies made from pantry staples and whatever ingredients remained affordable. By 1970, all 30 had disappeared from American ovens. Number 1 uses chestnuts and rum that nobody bakes with anymore in pies. Number 7 contains vinegar as the main ingredient. Now we are rediscovering these 30 forgotten dollar pies that filled dessert tables across America in the 1950s. Nestle Road pie was the most elegant dessert in 1950s America. Almost nobody today has ever heard of it. This elaborate pie combined chestnuts, rum, and Bavarian cream into layers of sophistication. It became the ultimate dinner party showpiece. The pie required ingredients most Americans had never tasted before. Specialty stores imported candied chestnuts from Europe. Housewives paired them with maraschino cherries, heavy cream, eggs, sugar, gelatin, and dark rum. Making this pie demanded hours of careful work. Cooks heated milk with gelatin to create Bavarian cream. They folded in rum-flavored whipped cream and vanilla. Chopped candied chestnuts and bright red cherries mixed throughout. This created beautiful flecks of color. The luxurious mixture poured into a pre-baked crust. It chilled for several hours until firm enough to slice. Despite its elegance, the pie cost only 30 cents to make. It was the most expensive on this list, but still well under $1. The rum-soaked flavor and silky texture impressed every dinner guest. However, by the 1960s, the complicated preparation seemed like too much trouble. Hard-to-find ingredients made it impractical. Simpler desserts replaced it. Today, the name sounds foreign and intimidating. The recipe has been completely forgotten by modern American bakers who have never tasted its remarkable flavor. Farm families always had dried beans in the pantry. That's why pinto bean pie became one of the cheapest desserts during the Depression. It cost just 20 cents to make. Housewives baked it regularly throughout the 1930s and 1940s. The recipe survived into the 1950s in rural areas. This bizarre pie used mashed pinto beans as the primary filling. Sugar and spices transformed them into something remarkable. Most people said it tasted exactly like sweet potato pie. Cooks soaked pinto beans overnight. They boiled them until completely soft. The beans were mashed smooth with a potato masher or fork. This created a thick puree. Sugar, melted butter, vanilla extract, and beaten eggs mixed into the bean paste. Sometimes a pinch of cinnamon was added. The mixture looked suspiciously beige and thick. It looked nothing like traditional pie filling. It poured into an unbaked pie shell. The pie baked at 350 degrees for 45 minutes. The center had to set firm. The finished pie sliced cleanly. It tasted sweet, creamy, and surprisingly delicious. Guests could never identify the secret ingredient, but grocery stores expanded after the war. Sweet potatoes became available year-round. Families stopped making bean pie. The recipe seemed too strange, too poverty-stricken. By 1965, it had completely vanished from American tables. End-of-season gardens always produced dozens of green tomatoes. Nothing could ripen them before the first frost hit. Practical housewives refused to waste anything from their gardens. Green tomato pie solved the problem perfectly. It cost only 18 cents to make. The pie tasted surprisingly similar to apple pie. Guests often mistook it for the real thing. Sliced green tomatoes formed the base of this unusual dessert. Cooks peeled and sliced them thin. The tomatoes layered inside a double pie crust. Sugar, cinnamon, lemon juice, and butter seasoned each layer. Some recipes added a tablespoon of flour to thicken the juices. The top crust sealed everything inside. Small slits vented the steam. The pie baked at 375 degrees for about 50 minutes. The tomatoes softened completely and absorbed all the spices. The filling turned golden and syrupy. The tartness of green tomatoes balanced perfectly with the sugar. The cinnamon added warmth. The lemon juice brightened everything. Families served it warm with fresh cream poured over the top. But modern Americans can't imagine tomatoes in dessert. The idea sounds disgusting to most people today. Supermarkets made apples available year-round. Nobody needed to use green tomatoes anymore. By 1970, this practical farmhouse pie had disappeared completely from American recipe boxes.
Many of you have been asking where to find these recipes. We've gathered hundreds of them from the Depression era through the 1970s in our cookbook, Grandma's Kitchen. Complete instructions, pro tips in 10 chapters. Link is in the description below. Now, let's get back to the video.
Victory Gardens produced carrots by the bushel during World War II. Housewives needed creative ways to use them all. Carrot pie became a popular wartime dessert. It cost just 18 cents to make. The pie tasted remarkably similar to pumpkin pie. Many people actually preferred it. Grated carrots formed the heart of this economical dessert. Cooks boiled carrots until fork tender. They mashed them smooth, or put them through a food mill. The carrot puree mixed with eggs, milk, sugar, nutmeg, and ginger. Some recipes added a splash of vanilla. The spices masked the vegetable flavor completely. The mixture poured into an unbaked single pie crust. It baked at 350 degrees for 45 minutes. The filling set firm like custard. The top turned golden brown. The finished pie sliced beautifully. It had a smooth, creamy texture. The warm spices made it taste exactly like a holiday dessert. Families served it with whipped cream on top. But after the war ended, people wanted to forget rationing. They wanted real pumpkin pie, not substitutes. Carrots belonged in salads, not desserts. The recipe seemed too wartime, too make-do. Store-bought pumpkin became cheap and convenient. By 1960, carrot pie had been completely forgotten. Today's bakers have never heard of it. Deep brown sugar and corn syrup created the mysterious amber color. That's how this pie got its unusual name. Amber pie was a Southern specialty in the 1940s and 1950s. It cost 22 cents to make. The filling had a unique caramel flavor. It was sweeter than chess pie, but less rich than pecan pie. Brown sugar formed the base of the recipe. Cooks mixed it with dark corn syrup, beaten eggs, melted butter, and vanilla extract. Some versions added a tablespoon of flour for thickness. Others left it out completely. The mixture looked dark and glossy. It poured into a pre-baked pie shell. The pie baked at 325 degrees for about 40 minutes. The filling puffed slightly as it baked. Then it settled as it cooled. The top formed a shiny, crackled surface. The inside stayed smooth and dense. The flavor was intensely sweet, with deep molasses notes. Some families added raisins or chopped dates for texture. Others kept it plain and simple. The pie sliced cleanly when fully cooled. It paired perfectly with black coffee. But by the 1960s, pecan pie dominated Southern dessert tables. Amber pie seemed old-fashioned and plain. Nobody wanted a pie without nuts or fruit. The name sounded strange and unappealing. The recipe quietly disappeared from community cookbooks. These first 5 pies represent the rarest desserts America forgot: chestnuts, beans, green tomatoes, carrots, and amber syrup-filled crusts that nobody bakes anymore. The next 5 pies are equally strange. They used ingredients that sound impossible today, but fed millions of families through the hardest years. Nobody could guess the secret ingredient in mystery pie. That's exactly why grandmothers loved baking it. This 20-cent dessert fooled every dinner guest. The filling tasted like rich pecan pie, but it contained no pecans at all. Saltine crackers formed the surprising base of this Depression-era trick. Cooks crushed about 20 crackers into coarse crumbs. The crumbs mixed with stiffly beaten egg whites, sugar, vanilla, and chopped pecans. Some recipes used walnuts instead. The meringue-like mixture stayed light and fluffy. It folded into a pre-baked pie shell. The pie baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes. The top turned golden and slightly crispy. The inside stayed chewy and sweet. They insisted real pecans must be hidden somewhere. The pie cost almost nothing to make. Saltines were a pantry staple. Eggs came from backyard chickens. But after the 1950s, the joke wore thin. People wanted real ingredients, not substitutes. The novelty seemed childish. Mystery pie disappeared from recipe collections. Today's bakers have never experienced the fun of fooling their guests with crackers. Logging, camps in the North Woods served this pie to hungry workers. That's how lumberjack pie got its rugged name. It cost just 18 cents to make. The pie required no fruit whatsoever. Vinegar created the tangy sweetness instead. This shocked most people who tried it. The filling combined white vinegar with vanilla extract, beaten eggs, sugar, and melted butter. Some recipes added a handful of raisins. Others kept it plain. The mixture looked thin and unpromising. It poured into an unbaked pie shell. The pie baked at 375 degrees for 35 minutes. The filling puffed up as it baked. It settled into a smooth custard as it cooled. The vinegar's sharpness disappeared completely during baking. What remained was a sweet tart flavor unlike anything else. The texture was creamy and dense. It sliced perfectly when cold. Lumberjacks ate huge slices with their morning coffee. The pie stayed fresh for days without refrigeration. That made it perfect for camp cooking. But as logging camps modernized, the recipe faded away. Home bakers couldn't imagine vinegar in dessert. The idea sounded terrible. Store-bought fruit pies seemed more appealing. By 1965, lumberjack pie had been completely forgotten, except in the oldest camp cookbooks stored in attics. Remote cabins in Appalachia relied on maple syrup for sweetness. Sugar was expensive and hard to transport. Backwoods pie used pure maple syrup as the main ingredient. It cost 25 cents to make. The pie had a rich, deep flavor that tasted like concentrated autumn. Maple syrup mixed with dark molasses, beaten eggs, melted butter, and chopped walnuts. Some recipes added a pinch of salt to balance the sweetness. The mixture looked dark and thick, like motor oil. It poured into an unbaked single pie crust. The pie baked at 350 degrees for 45 minutes. The filling set firm but stayed slightly gooey in the center. The walnuts added crunch throughout. The flavor was intensely sweet with woodsy notes. Each slice tasted like maple candy. Families served it with unsweetened whipped cream to cut the richness. The pie stayed good for over a week. Backwoods families made it during maple sugaring season. They stored syrup all year for special occasions. But as corn syrup became cheap and available everywhere, maple syrup seemed too expensive. The pie disappeared from most tables. Today it exists only in a few Appalachian family recipe books. Modern bakers have no idea how incredible real maple syrup tastes in a pie. Southern farmhouses always had potatoes stored in the cellar. White potato pie turned this humble vegetable into an elegant dessert. It cost only 18 cents to make. The pie tasted exactly like sweet potato pie. Guests could rarely tell the difference. Mashed white potatoes formed the creamy base of this surprising recipe. Cooks boiled peeled potatoes until tender. They mashed them completely smooth. The potato puree, mixed with sugar, beaten eggs, melted butter, lemon zest, nutmeg, and sometimes a splash of cream. The mixture looked pale yellow and thick. It poured into an unbaked pie shell. The pie baked at 375 degrees for 40 minutes. The filling set firm like custard. The top turned light golden brown. The lemon zest added brightness. The nutmeg provided warmth. The potato flavor vanished entirely. What remained was pure sweetness and spice. The texture was smoother than sweet potato pie. It sliced beautifully when cold. Families served it as a special Sunday dessert. But as sweet potatoes became available everywhere, white potato pie seemed pointless. Why use a substitute when you could have the real thing? The recipe seemed too Depression era, too make-do. By 1965, it had disappeared from Southern kitchens completely. Today, nobody believes potatoes ever belonged in dessert. Colonial New England created Marlboro pie in the 1700s. It survived all the way into the 1950s in old Yankee families. The pie cost 22 cents to make. It used grated apples instead of sliced ones. This created a completely different texture. Cooks peeled and grated tart green apples on a box grater. The applesauce-like pulp, mixed with beaten eggs, heavy cream, lemon juice, sugar, and a splash of sherry. Some recipes added nutmeg or cinnamon. The mixture looked pale and chunky. It poured into an unbaked single pie crust. The pie baked at 350 degrees for 45 minutes. The filling puffed slightly as it baked. It settled into a smooth custard as it cooled. The grated apples dissolved almost completely. The sherry added subtle warmth and complexity. The lemon juice brightened everything. The finished pie tasted sophisticated and refined. It was nothing like regular apple pie. Old New England families served it at Thanksgiving alongside pumpkin pie, but younger generations preferred modern desserts. The sherry seemed old-fashioned. The grated apple method seemed tedious. Why grate when you could slice? By 1970, Marlboro pie had vanished, except from the oldest handwritten recipe cards. Today's bakers have never heard the name. The 300-year-old recipe is completely extinct. The first 10 pies prove how creative Depression-era bakers became. Chestnuts, beans, green tomatoes, crackers, vinegar, and potatoes filled crusts when nothing else was available. The next 10 pies move slightly closer to familiar territory, but they still use forgotten techniques and strange ingredients nobody remembers today. The filling looked like glass when properly made. That's exactly how transparent pie earned its unusual name. This Kentucky specialty cost just 18 cents to bake. The pie had an ultra-clear filling that let you see straight through to the bottom crust. It was one of the strangest-looking desserts in America. Cooks mixed white sugar with melted butter, beaten eggs, a splash of cream, and vanilla extract. Some added a tablespoon of flour. Others insisted the filling must stay completely liquid. No fruit, no spices, no coloring of any kind. The mixture looked like pale sugar water. It poured into an unbaked pie shell. The pie baked slowly at 325 degrees for 50 minutes. The filling had to set without browning. That was the difficult part. If the oven ran too hot, the top turned golden and ruined the transparent effect. When done correctly, the filling stayed absolutely clear. It looked like hardened syrup or glass. The texture was smooth and jelly-like. The flavor was pure sweetness with buttery richness, nothing else. Kentucky families served it at church socials and family reunions. Guests marveled at how clear it looked. But by the 1960s, the pie seemed too plain and boring. People wanted chocolate, fruit, or nuts in their desserts. A clear pie looked unfinished and strange. The recipe disappeared from most community cookbooks. Today, almost nobody outside Kentucky has ever heard of transparent pie. The ultra-clear filling technique has been completely lost. Named after the Confederate president, this Southern pie honored a controversial figure. Jefferson Davis pie was popular throughout the 1940s and 1950s. It cost 25 cents to make. The pie combined dates, spices, and pecans into a rich, dense filling. It tasted like a cross between pecan pie and fruitcake. Chopped dates formed the heart of the recipe. Cooks mixed them with beaten eggs, brown sugar, melted butter, cinnamon, nutmeg, and chopped pecans. Some versions added a splash of bourbon. Others used vanilla extract instead. The mixture looked dark and chunky. It poured into an unbaked pie shell. The pie baked at 350 degrees for 45 minutes. The filling set firm, but stayed slightly chewy. The dates softened and melted into the custard. The pecans added crunch throughout. The spices made it taste like a holiday dessert. The flavor was deeply sweet, with molasses undertones. Southern families served it at Confederate Memorial Day celebrations and family gatherings. The name honored their heritage. But as the civil rights movement progressed, the name became uncomfortable. Young people questioned why they were celebrating Jefferson Davis. The pie seemed outdated and politically wrong. Families quietly stopped making it. By 1975, the recipe had nearly vanished from Southern kitchens. Today it's considered offensive to even mention the name. The pie still exists in a few old cookbooks, but nobody bakes it anymore. The recipe is effectively extinct. The Shaker religious community invented this pie in the 1800s. It survived into the 1950s in Pennsylvania and Ohio. Shaker lemon pie cost 25 cents to make. The recipe used whole lemons, peel and all. Nothing was wasted. That was the Shaker way. Cooks sliced 2 whole lemons paper thin. The slices soaked in sugar for 24 hours. This drew out the bitterness from the peel. The lemon slices macerated into a thick, syrupy mixture. Beaten eggs mixed into the lemon-sugar blend. The combination poured between 2 pie crusts. The pie baked at 375 degrees for 50 minutes. The top crust turned golden brown. The filling bubbled slightly around the edges. The finished pie had an intensely lemony flavor. It was more sour than sweet. The texture was chewy from the candied lemon peel. Each bite delivered a powerful citrus punch. Shaker families served tiny slices because the flavor was so strong. The pie kept for over a week without refrigeration. That made it practical for community meals. But as Shaker communities declined, the recipe faded away. Modern Americans couldn't imagine eating lemon peel. The bitterness seemed unpleasant. Regular lemon meringue pie seemed more appealing. The 24-hour soaking time seemed too inconvenient. By 1970, Shaker lemon pie existed only in historical cookbooks. Today's bakers have never experienced its remarkable intensity. No actual possums were harmed making possum pie. The name was purely whimsical and strange. This Mississippi Delta creation cost 30 cents to make. It was the most expensive pie in the moderately rare category. The pie layered cream cheese, chocolate pudding, and whipped cream into a pecan crust. It was rich, cold, and absolutely decadent. Cooks crushed pecans with graham cracker crumbs and butter to form the crust. The mixture pressed into a pie pan and baked until firm. The first layer combined softened cream cheese with powdered sugar and a portion of whipped cream. This spread across the cooled crust. The second layer was chocolate pudding, made from scratch, with cocoa, sugar, milk, and eggs. It cooled completely, before spreading over the cream cheese. The final layer was pure whipped cream sweetened with vanilla. The assembled pie chilled for at least 4 hours. The layers stayed distinct, but blended perfectly when sliced. The cream cheese added tang. The chocolate provided richness. The whipped cream lightened everything. The pecan crust added crunch. Why was it called possum pie? Nobody knows for certain. Some say the layers looked like a possum's striped tail. Others claim it was just a silly Southern joke. The pie was extremely popular at church potlucks and family reunions throughout the 1950s. But the name eventually seemed too country, too backwards. Young people were embarrassed by it. The recipe disappeared by 1980. Today, nobody makes possum pie anymore. Sour cream was a staple in every farmhouse kitchen. Dairy farms produced it constantly. Sour cream raisin pie used it as the main ingredient. The pie cost 22 cents to make. It had a unique, tangy, sweet flavor that most people had never tasted before. Plump raisins soaked in hot water for 15 minutes. This softened them completely. Cooks mixed thick sour cream with sugar, beaten eggs, cinnamon, nutmeg, and a pinch of salt. The drained raisins folded into the mixture. Some recipes added a splash of vanilla. The combination looked creamy and speckled with dark raisins. It poured into an unbaked pie shell. The pie baked at 350 degrees for 45 minutes. The filling set like custard. The top turned light golden. The finished pie had to cool completely before slicing. The sour cream's tanginess balanced perfectly with the sweet raisins. The spices added warmth. The texture was smooth and creamy, with bursts of chewy raisins throughout. Midwestern families served it as an everyday dessert. Nothing fancy or special, just good, simple farm food. But as store-bought yogurt became popular, sour cream seemed old-fashioned. People started using it only for baked potatoes and stroganoff. The idea of sour cream in dessert seemed wrong. By 1970, sour cream raisin pie had vanished from most tables. Today's bakers can't imagine combining those ingredients. The moderately rare pies show how Americans used whatever they had. Transparent fillings, controversial names, whole lemons, layered cream cheese, and tangy sour cream-filled crusts across America. The final 15 pies become slightly more familiar, but even these have vanished completely from modern kitchens. Shredded coconut arrived in American stores during the 1920s. Housewives immediately started experimenting with it. Coconut pie became popular throughout the 1930s and 1940s. It cost 20 cents to make. The pie tasted tropical and exotic. It was completely different from anything else on Depression-era tables. Sweetened shredded coconut formed the heart of this simple dessert. Cooks mixed it with beaten eggs, sugar, melted butter, vanilla extract, and a cup of milk. Some recipes added a tablespoon of flour to help the filling set. The mixture looked white and chunky. Coconut pieces floated throughout. It poured into an unbaked pie shell. The pie baked at 350 degrees for 50 minutes. The coconut rose to the top as it baked. It formed a golden, toasted crust. The bottom stayed creamy and custard-like. The finished pie sliced beautifully when completely cooled. Each bite delivered intense coconut flavor. The texture combined creamy custard with chewy coconut. Families served it at special Sunday dinners. The tropical flavor made it feel luxurious. But as coconut cream pie became the standard version, this simpler recipe disappeared. Bakeries sold fancy coconut cream pies with meringue towers. The plain version seemed homely and outdated. By 1965, most families had switched to the cream version. The original coconut custard pie faded away. Today's recipes call for coconut cream or coconut milk. The simple shredded coconut version has been forgotten. The strange name came from a family surname in Virginia. Osgood pie was a southern Appalachian specialty throughout the 1940s and 1950s. It cost 22 cents to make. The pie combined raisins, pecans, and vinegar into an unusual filling. It tasted both sweet and tangy at the same time. Beaten egg yolks mixed with sugar, melted butter, cinnamon, cloves, and a tablespoon of white vinegar. Chopped raisins and pecans folded into the mixture. Separately, egg whites were beaten stiff with sugar. They folded gently into the egg yolk mixture. This created a light, fluffy filling. The combination poured into an unbaked pie shell. The pie baked at 350 degrees for 35 minutes. The filling puffed dramatically as it baked. It settled slightly as it cooled. The top formed a golden, crackled surface. The inside stayed light and airy. The vinegar's tang balanced the sweetness perfectly. The raisins added chewiness. The pecans provided crunch. The spices made it taste like a holiday dessert. Mountain families served Osgood pie at church suppers and weddings. The recipe passed down through generations, but the name sounded too old-fashioned and strange to younger cooks. They had no connection to the Osgood family. The vinegar seemed unnecessary when you had fruit. By 1975, the recipe had nearly disappeared from Appalachian kitchens. Today, almost nobody has heard of Osgood pie. The family name has been forgotten along with the recipe. My homemade butterscotch tasted nothing like the candy. Heavy cream mixed with white sugar, flour, and vanilla extract. Some recipes added a pinch of salt. That was the entire filling. No eggs, no fruit, no flavoring beyond vanilla. The mixture looked like sweetened milk. It poured into an unbaked pie shell. The pie baked at 350 degrees for 1 hour. Every 15 minutes, someone had to open the oven and stir the filling. This prevented a skin from forming. The constant stirring created a smooth, creamy texture. The top never browned, it stayed pale ivory. Butter dotted the surface. Cinnamon and nutmeg dusted over everything. The finished pie looked simple and plain, but the taste was pure heaven. The cream thickened into silk. The sugar provided gentle sweetness. The spices added just enough flavor. Indiana families called it Hoosier pie or desperation pie. It was the easiest dessert to make during hard times, but as cream became expensive, the pie seemed wasteful and indulgent. Buttermilk was leftover liquid from making butter. Farm families always had gallons of it available. Buttermilk pie turned this byproduct into dessert. The pie cost just 18 cents to make. It tasted tangy, sweet, and absolutely delicious. Buttermilk mixed with sugar, melted butter, beaten eggs, flour, and vanilla extract. Some recipes added lemon zest for extra brightness. The mixture looked thin and yellow. It poured into an unbaked pie shell. The pie baked at 350 degrees for 50 minutes. The filling puffed slightly as it baked. It settled into a smooth custard as it cooled. The top formed a delicate golden skin. The inside stayed creamy and dense. The buttermilk's tanginess balanced perfectly with the sugar. The texture was smoother than chess pie. The flavor was more complex than custard pie. Southern families served it year-round. It was simple, cheap, and reliable. The recipe never failed. But as fewer families made their own butter, buttermilk became a specialty item. People only bought it for specific recipes, like biscuits or pancakes. A whole quart seemed wasteful for one pie. Regular milk worked fine in most desserts. By 1975, buttermilk pie had faded from most tables. Today it survives mainly in rural southern communities. After item so paean, 20 pies down, 10 remaining. The rarest desserts used chestnuts, beans, and vinegar. The moderately rare combined transparent fillings, whole lemons, and sour cream. Now the final 10 pies enter slightly more familiar territory. But even these common Depression-era desserts have completely vanished from modern American tables. Every grandmother in America knew how to make chocolate meringue pie from scratch during the 1940s and 1950s. No boxes, no shortcuts, no instant pudding mixes existed yet. The pie cost 25 cents to make with basic ingredients everyone had in their pantries. It required patience, skill, and constant attention at the stove for over an hour. This wasn't the easy dessert modern cooks imagine when they think about chocolate pie today. Cooks melted unsweetened chocolate squares in a double boiler over gently simmering water. The chocolate had to melt slowly and evenly, without burning or seizing into a grainy mess. Separately, white sugar mixed thoroughly with flour and a pinch of salt in a heavy saucepan. Whole milk slowly stirred into the dry ingredients until completely smooth without any lumps. This cooked over medium heat while stirring constantly in circles with a wooden spoon. The mixture had to thicken gradually, without forming any lumps whatsoever. That took a full 15 minutes of non-stop stirring without rest. Your arm ached badly from the constant circular motion. You couldn't stop even for a single moment, or lumps would form instantly and ruin everything. The mixture had to reach the consistency of thick, smooth pudding. Beaten egg yolks tempered very carefully with some of the hot chocolate mixture added slowly. You added the hot liquid gradually while whisking constantly to prevent scrambling. Then everything combined together and cooked for exactly 2 more minutes. the melted chocolate and vanilla extract stirred in at the very end. The hot filling poured immediately into a pre-baked pie shell while still steaming. Meanwhile, egg whites were beaten with cream of tartar until foamy and white. White sugar gradually added 1 tablespoon at a time, while beating constantly until stiff, glossy peaks formed perfectly. The meringue had to be absolutely perfect in texture, not underbeaten or it would weep liquid later, not overbeaten or it would turn grainy and deflate in the oven. The meringue spread thickly over the hot filling immediately while the filling was still steaming hot. This sealed the edges completely and prevented weeping later. Every single bit of chocolate filling had to be covered completely or the meringue would shrink away from the edges during baking. The pie baked at exactly 350 degrees for precisely 12 minutes. The meringue had to brown beautifully golden without burning black. Timing was absolutely critical. 1 minute too long, and the meringue turned bitter and dark brown. 1 minute too short, and it stayed pale and undercooked and wept. Cornmeal wasn't just for cornbread and hush puppies in the American South during the Depression era. It combined yellow cornmeal with sweet custard to create a unique 2-layer texture nobody makes anymore today. The result tasted like sweet cornbread baked inside a pie shell with smooth custard poured on top. Yellow cornmeal mixed thoroughly with white sugar, beaten eggs, melted butter, and whole milk in a large bowl. Some family recipes added vanilla extract for extra sweetness and deeper flavor. Others used freshly grated lemon zest for brightness and pleasant tang. The mixture looked grainy, yellow, and completely unpromising sitting in the mixing bowl. It resembled thick cornbread batter more than anything that belonged in pie filling. Nothing about it looked remotely like dessert in its raw, uncooked state. It poured into an unbaked pie shell and looked completely unappetizing and wrong, sitting there waiting. The pie baked at 350 degrees for a full 45 minutes until completely set and firm. Something absolutely magical and wonderful happened in the oven during the long baking time. The heavy cornmeal settled slowly and naturally to the bottom as it baked in the heat. It formed a dense, cake-like layer with real grainy texture you could feel. The lighter custard rose naturally to the top and set smooth and silky like pudding. The finished pie had 2 completely distinct layers with totally different textures. The combination was unusual, surprising, and absolutely delicious in every possible way. Chess pie was the single most common Southern pie during the Depression and World War II years. Every single cook from Virginia to Texas had a version in her handwritten recipe box. The pie cost just 18 cents to make, with ingredients everyone always had available. It required only basic pantry staples nobody ever ran out of. No fruit, no chocolate, no special ingredients whatsoever needed. Just eggs, sugar, butter, and cornmeal or flour. That's literally it. 5 simple ingredients total. The name's origin remains hotly debated even today among serious food historians and Southern cooks. Some claim it came from chest pie. Nobody knows for certain which story is actually true and authentic. Both sound equally plausible and believable. Beaten eggs mixed thoroughly with white sugar, melted butter, vanilla extract, and a tablespoon of yellow cornmeal or flour. Some versions added a good splash of vinegar for tang and brightness. Others used fresh lemon juice instead of vinegar for flavor. It poured into an unbaked pie shell and went straight into the hot oven. The pie baked at 350 degrees for 45 minutes without any fuss or complications. The filling puffed up slightly and dramatically as it baked in the heat. It looked like it might overflow the crust entirely. Then it settled down into a dense, smooth custard as it cooled slowly on the counter. The top formed a thin, delicate, crackled crust that looked beautiful. The inside stayed rich, sweet, and incredibly dense throughout every layer. The texture was noticeably denser than regular custard pie, but much smoother than pecan pie. somewhere perfectly in between the two extremes. The flavor was pure sweetness, with rich buttery undertones throughout. Nothing fancy or complicated whatsoever. Just honest, simple, straightforward dessert. No tricks or surprises hidden inside anywhere. Southern families served chess pie at absolutely every single occasion imaginable throughout the year. Weddings, funerals, church suppers, Sunday dinners, Christmas, Easter, birthdays, anniversaries. The recipe never failed once ever. It was completely foolproof and reliable every single time. Even terrible cooks who burned everything could make perfect chess pie every single time without fail. Chiffon pies became extremely fashionable and popular in the 1940s among modern homemakers everywhere. They represented cutting-edge cooking and sophisticated elegance at dinner parties. They were noticeably lighter than heavy custard pies, but richer and more satisfying than simple cream pies. Raisin chiffon pie cost 22 cents to make, with readily available ingredients from any store. It combined plump raisins with airy chiffon filling perfectly and beautifully. The result was elegant, sophisticated, and impressively beautiful at formal dinner parties. Raisins simmered gently in water with white sugar and fresh lemon juice until plump and soft throughout. This took about 15 minutes of gentle cooking over medium heat. The raisins had to absorb all the liquid completely and become fat and juicy. This created a thick, syrupy mixture that smelled absolutely amazing and wonderful. Unflavored gelatin dissolved in cold water for 5 full minutes until it bloomed properly. Then it stirred into the hot raisin mixture until completely dissolved without any lumps remaining. The combination cooled at room temperature until it started to visibly thicken noticeably. You had to watch it very carefully and constantly. Too thin, and it wouldn't hold the egg whites properly at all. Too thick, and you couldn't fold the mixture smoothly without deflating everything. Meanwhile, egg whites were beaten stiff and glossy with white sugar until they formed perfect peaks. The thickened raisin mixture folded gently but thoroughly into the beaten egg whites with care. This step required a delicate, experienced touch and real skill. Fold too hard and aggressively, and you deflated all the air from the whites completely. Fold too gently and timidly, and streaks of egg white remained throughout the mixture. This created a light, fluffy filling studded with dark raisins throughout every single bite. The combination spooned carefully into a pre-baked pie shell without deflating the volume. The pie chilled for at least 4 full hours, until completely set and firm throughout. The gelatin held everything together perfectly and securely. The texture was light and airy, exactly like French mousse. The raisins added pleasant chewiness and concentrated sweetness throughout every single bite. Each forkful melted instantly on the tongue. Some cooks topped it with sweetened whipped cream. Others served it completely plain to showcase the chiffon texture. The pie looked elegant and impressive on the dining table. It was absolutely perfect for ladies' luncheons and bridge club meetings every week. Women competed fiercely to make the lightest, fluffiest chiffon possible to impress their friends. This was the absolute cheapest pie on the entire 30-item list by far. Southern jelly pie cost just 15 cents to make with homemade ingredients from the pantry. It used homemade jelly as the primary main ingredient for the bottom layer. Every single farmhouse had shelves lined with dozens of jars of preserved jelly from summer berries. Grape, blackberry, or strawberry jelly worked best for this particular recipe. Whatever you had preserved during the summer months, cooks spread a thick, generous layer of jelly across the bottom of an unbaked pie shell carefully. The jelly layer had to be at least half an inch thick, maybe even more. Any thinner, and it disappeared completely during the baking process. Separately, beaten eggs mixed thoroughly with white sugar, melted butter, and vanilla extract in a bowl. Some family recipes added a tablespoon of flour to help the custard set properly and firmly. This simple custard mixture poured very carefully and slowly over the jelly layer. You had to pour extremely slowly and gently. without disturbing the jelly layer at all. The two layers had to stay completely separate and distinct throughout. If you poured too fast or carelessly, they mixed together and ruined the entire effect. The pie baked at 350 degrees for exactly 40 minutes until the custard set. The custard set firm and solid on top and turned beautiful golden brown. The jelly stayed liquid and jammy underneath, without setting at all. The finished pie had two completely distinct, separate layers, with different textures. The top was firm golden custard, that sliced cleanly with a sharp knife. The bottom was jewel-toned jelly that oozed slightly when cut and plated. When sliced and plated carefully, the jelly flowed beautifully around the custard, creating gorgeous swirls on the plate. Each bite combined sweet, firm custard with tart, flowing fruit jelly perfectly. The contrast was absolutely delicious and delightful in every way. Children especially loved the bright, colorful jelly layer visible on the bottom. It looked exactly like candy to them. Families used whatever jelly they had preserved that particular year in mason jars. Each pie tasted different depending on the fruit used that summer. Wild blackberry made the best version according to most old country cooks. The natural tartness balanced the sweet custard absolutely perfectly. But as store-bought pies became common and cheap during the 1960s, homemade jelly pie seemed too simple and country. The two-layer technique looked unsophisticated and homemade in a bad, embarrassing way to modern people. 25 forgotten pies down, 5 remaining. From chocolate pudding stirred by hand to cornmeal custard to simple jelly layers, these desserts fed millions. The final 5 pies are the most common of the forgotten. Even these everyday Depression-era desserts have completely vanished from modern kitchens. Single men living alone in rooming houses and small apartments couldn't afford fancy ingredients or complicated recipes requiring advanced skill. Bachelor's fruit pie was designed specifically for them. The pie cost 18 cents to make, with shelf-stable ingredients that lasted forever. It used dried fruit instead of fresh, because fresh fruit spoiled quickly without refrigeration available. Raisins and currants were the most common, affordable choices available everywhere. Raisins and currants soaked in hot water for 20 full minutes to rehydrate them. This plumped them up significantly and removed some of the concentrated, overwhelming sweetness. The hot water softened them until they were fat, juicy, and tender throughout. The drained fruit, mixed with white sugar, ground cinnamon, ground nutmeg, and a good splash of vinegar for tang. Some family recipes added chopped walnuts if available and affordable at the store. The mixture, small slits cut carefully into the top, vented the steam during the baking process. The pie baked at 375 degrees for 45 minutes until golden brown. The dried fruit softened completely and released its concentrated juices throughout the filling. The filling became thick, jammy, and incredibly flavorful. The crust turned golden brown and perfectly flaky. The finished pie smelled absolutely incredible coming from the oven, like Christmas spices filling the room. The flavor was intensely sweet, with warm holiday spices in every single bite. The texture was chewy, substantial, and satisfying. One slice was incredibly filling. Vanilla cream pie. Before there was banana cream or coconut cream or chocolate cream, there was plain vanilla cream pie standing alone. It cost 20 cents to make during the 1940s and 1950s, with simple ingredients. The pie was pure vanilla custard, baked in a flaky crust. Nothing fancy, nothing extra added whatsoever. White sugar, flour, and salt mixed together thoroughly in a heavy saucepan on the stove. Whole milk slowly stirred in until completely smooth without any lumps anywhere. This cooked over medium heat while stirring constantly with a wooden spoon in circles. Beaten egg yolks, tempered carefully with some of the hot mixture, poured in slowly. Everything combined together and cooked for exactly 2 more minutes until thick. Butter and pure vanilla extract stirred in at the very end off the heat. The vanilla had to be real vanilla extract, not imitation vanilla flavoring. The pie chilled for at least 4 hours until completely set and cold throughout. It was familiar, comforting, and safe. No strange fruits or crunchy nuts anywhere. Just vanilla they recognized and loved. But as banana cream and coconut cream became the standard versions in bakeries and diners during the 1960s, plain vanilla seemed boring and unfinished to customers everywhere. Why have plain vanilla when you could have bananas or coconut added? Vanilla meant something was missing or incomplete. Bakeries stopped making the plain version entirely from their menus. Canadian logging camps served this pie to exhausted workers after long days in the forest. The recipe crossed the border into northern Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota easily. Canadian backwoods pie cost 25 cents to make with expensive ingredients. It combined pure maple syrup with dark brown sugar for double intense sweetness. The double sweetener made it incredibly rich and almost overwhelming to eat. Pure maple syrup mixed with dark brown sugar, beaten eggs, melted butter, and chopped walnuts thoroughly. Some family recipes added a good splash of heavy cream to make it even richer. The mixture looked dark and glossy, like motor oil or thick molasses. It poured into an unbaked pie shell and looked almost black. The pie baked at 350 degrees for 45 minutes until set. The filling bubbled furiously around the edges as it baked in the heat. The smell was absolutely intoxicating and filled the entire house. It set firm, but stayed slightly gooey and sticky in the center. The walnuts rose naturally to the top and toasted golden brown. The finished pie was almost too sweet to eat by itself alone. Most people couldn't finish a whole slice without help. Families served very small slivers, with huge dollops of unsweetened whipped cream or plain yogurt on top. The cream cut through the intense, overwhelming sweetness perfectly. The flavor was pure maple and molasses combined together. Nothing subtle about it whatsoever. It tasted like concentrated autumn in every single bite. Each forkful was chewy, rich, and incredibly satisfying. Logging camps served it because it provided massive amounts of calories quickly and efficiently. Workers needed serious energy for 14-hour days cutting timber in freezing temperatures. The pie kept them fueled and warm throughout the day. A single slice provided enough energy for hours of hard physical labor. But as logging became mechanized and camps closed down during the 1960s, the recipe faded into obscurity. Modern Americans found it way too sweet to enjoy at all. The double sweetener seemed excessive and completely unnecessary. Why use both maple syrup and brown sugar together? One or the other should be enough. Regular pecan pie seemed more balanced and sophisticated in comparison. By 1980, Canadian backwoods pie had disappeared from most tables everywhere. Today, almost nobody outside old logging families has heard of it at all. The ultra-sweet double syrup combination has been completely lost to history forever. Despite its name, Washington pie wasn't actually a pie at all. It was a cake, but early Americans called all desserts pie, regardless of their actual structure or form. Washington pie honored George Washington and American independence proudly. The dessert cost 20 cents to make during the 1940s and 1950s. It consisted of 2 layers of light sponge cake with jam spread between them, powdered sugar dusted generously over the top. That was the entire recipe. Nothing complicated at all. Simple yellow sponge cake baked in 2 round pans until golden. The cakes had to be extremely light and airy. Eggs were beaten until thick and pale yellow, almost white in color. White sugar gradually added while beating constantly with a whisk. Flour and melted butter folded in very gently to preserve all the air bubbles. The batter divided evenly between 2 greased and floured cake pans. They baked at 350 degrees for 25 minutes until done. The cakes had to spring back when touched lightly. They cooled completely on wire racks before assembling. Raspberry jam or strawberry preserves spread thickly on one layer, at least half an inch thick. The second layer placed carefully on top without pressing down. Powdered sugar sifted generously over everything until the top was completely white. The finished dessert looked elegant and impressive on a cake stand. The cake was tender and delicate. The jam added fruity sweetness and bright color when you sliced it. The powdered sugar provided visual appeal and a little extra sweetness. Families served it at patriotic celebrations, 4th of July picnics, and Memorial Day gatherings proudly. The name honored America's founding father and first president. But as elaborate layer cakes with buttercream frosting became the standard during the 1960s, Washington pie seemed too plain and simple. Why have jam when you could have thick, rich frosting? The cake-not-pie confusion annoyed modern cooks constantly. The final pie on this list is nearly identical to item number 20 earlier, but old-time buttermilk pie had important regional variations that made it distinctly different. This version cost 18 cents to make with readily available ingredients. It added ground nutmeg and fresh lemon zest for extra layers of flavor. Those two simple ingredients completely transformed the basic recipe into something special. Buttermilk mixed with white sugar, melted butter, beaten eggs, flour, vanilla extract, freshly grated lemon zest, and ground nutmeg. The combination of bright citrus and warm spice made all the difference in the world. The mixture poured into an unbaked pie shell carefully. The pie baked at 350 degrees for 50 minutes until completely set. The filling puffed up and settled, just like the earlier plain version, but the flavor was dramatically more complex and interesting. The lemon zest added brightness and pleasant tang. The nutmeg provided warmth and comforting depth. The buttermilk's natural tang balanced everything absolutely perfectly. This version was more sophisticated and refined than plain buttermilk pie. Families in Tennessee and Kentucky strongly preferred this spiced version over all others. They claimed it was the original, authentic recipe passed down through generations. Other states completely disagreed and argued constantly about authenticity. Recipe arguments lasted for entire generations within families. Family feuds started over which version was truly correct and original. But regardless of which version was truly authentic and original, both versions disappeared completely by the 1980s. Modern cooks don't keep buttermilk in their refrigerators anymore regularly. They certainly don't buy a whole quart specifically for one pie. The tangy, spiced custard has been completely forgotten. Today's desserts are much sweeter and far less complex. Careful balance of tart and sweet seems old-fashioned and unnecessary. Young bakers have never tasted how fresh lemon zest and nutmeg transform simple buttermilk into something remarkable. The old-time version has vanished, along with all 29 others. These 30 forgotten pies tell the complete story of American survival, creativity, ingenuity, and dramatically changing tastes across 50 difficult years. From the rarest chestnuts and beans to the most common buttermilk, these pies fed America through its hardest times. Today they exist only in memory, and old cookbooks nobody opens anymore. The recipes are gone forever. These 30 forgotten pies vanished within a single generation. By 1980, almost nobody in America baked them anymore. Grandmothers who remembered the recipes passed away without teaching their grandchildren. The pies disappeared from community cookbooks, church fundraisers, and family gatherings completely. Modern supermarkets made fresh fruit available year-round. Instant pudding mixes replaced hours of stirring at the stove. Frozen pies filled freezer sections in every grocery store. Convenience won over tradition. Young families stopped baking from scratch entirely. The old recipes seemed too difficult, too time-consuming, too strange. Chestnuts, beans, and vinegar didn't belong in desserts anymore. Cornmeal and buttermilk seemed poverty-stricken and embarrassing. The names sounded archaic and outdated. Bachelor's pie, possum pie, mystery pie. Nobody wanted to serve desserts with those names. The pies represented hardship, rationing, and making do with nothing. America wanted to forget those years. Prosperity meant store-bought desserts. not homemade pies from dried fruit. Today, these 30 pies exist only in yellowed recipe cards stored in attics. Food historians occasionally mention them, but nobody bakes them. The flavors, textures, and techniques have been completely lost. An entire category of American dessert history disappeared forever. These pies survived the Depression and war years. They couldn't survive modern convenience and abundance.